We are live. If I actually was a more prepared person and scheduled these things, it would be a lot easier to put the link in.
I'm just, honestly, every time we do this, I have to remember how to do it.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I feel like it's morning because I just woke up, but it's actually noon where I am and probably later where other people are.
I mean, thank goodness I woke up. I stayed up way too late watching Netflix. And then, thank goodness.
Were you watching anything good?
I always watch Korean stuff. I was watching Hospital Playlist Season 2.
Fun.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, I'm popping this in the Discord. But I'm glad I woke up at like 9 o'clock because I had so much reading still to do. I had a quarter of the book left. So, whoops.
For real.
For real. Okay. Close that tab. Good on this tab.
All right. We'll give people a couple minutes to filter in from the Discord. Yeah. How's everyone doing on this Sunday? Everyone's reading going well?
Oh my gosh, my reading's all over the place. Actually, you know what? I had a pretty good July. I don't even know what month it is anymore.
This is the first book I've finished in a really long time.
I'm going to my my spreadsheet.
Amy. I finished this one, and the last book I finished was I've been doing some rereading, so
well, that's okay then. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books in July.
Oh my god, you're a reading machine.
It wasn't so bad. And like some good ones too. I was like pleased.
Hello. Wow, yeah, you are a reading machine.
I finally Did you ever read A Desolation Called Peace? We talked about this. Did you finish it?
No, I've not finished it. Oh, I've not even started it.
It was good.
It is on the shelf over there. But no, I've not finished it.
I had posted in Discord. I was like not sure about it, and I was like a chunk in, and then once I like actually sat down, I think I read the rest of the book like in a single sitting. It was good.
Nice.
I liked it. Yeah.
Okay, so we can get started. This is going to be it's going to be a twofer. So we didn't do one for a separate one for North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So we are going to start with the North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. And here I'm going to give lots of the reins over to Jessica because I'm going to admit something right now. I did not finish North and South.
So how far did you make it?
I made it like 75 pages.
Yeah.
Which actually was quite a feat because the edition I had was the Penguin Classic edition with like the black bottom. The one I'm talking about. Yeah, so it's really tiny font. And so I was going through a pretty bad reading slump. I posted a video about my horrendous reading slump. And I was finally feeling like I was coming out of it. Sat down to read North and South, and like I struggled for like 5 days. And it was just like making me actively hate reading and making me feel really dumb.
It's not. I would say like, it's not the book to break a reading slump.
Oh,
it's one that will maybe push you into one.
Yeah, it was very rough. So yeah, I'll let you take over the summary and how you felt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I posted in Discord a couple times how much I was struggling with it, and I had that awkward thing too where my library didn't have an audiobook copy of it, and so yes, that's so true. I also wish I could have time back from reading North and South. Here's the thing. I said to Chris, like, I watched the BBC adaptation a few years ago, like probably 5 to 10 years ago. And I thought it was so good. And I was like, when we're going to read a classic, I want one written by a woman from a female perspective. And like, this is going to talk about like social change. And it's written in like the 1850s. Like it's like almost a firsthand fictionalized account about what society felt like to people of a certain class in England. And that anxiety of somebody who is firmly like middle, verging on upper class, starting to interact with a new breed of wealthy middle class people who are self-made and who work in industry, right? Like there's so much meat there. And I love the adaptation. I thought it was so good. And so when we picked the book, I was feeling like super optimistic. And I didn't like it. And I couldn't find an audio copy. I ended up listening to an audio version narrated on YouTube by like an American, possibly Canadian, but American narrator. And it just feels weird to have an American try to do some of the, especially like the northern like accents. Like it just is not great. And I was listening to it on like the fastest speed I possibly could. And when we had to delay Liveshow, I literally put the book down. I was like, well, I don't have to finish this right now. And I was saying to Chris, like, I almost finished Third Rainbow Girl before North and South, just the way things kind of went along. So I just felt like this book could have been, and I wanted it to be so much more than it was, but I just struggled with all of it. Like the writing was dense. The characters were pretty boring. Everybody starts dying kind of near the end. Like there's a lot of deaths that happen.
You know what I find really hard to like really give two shits about in classic books, especially from England, is the stress and anxiety of the upper middle classes talking to people who work for a living. Like
I think it's interesting.
It's so difficult, and I understand that like this was like a real like stress for the time period, and it had actual massive implications. But as somebody who grew up with not a lot of money, and like reading it, it's just like a lot. It's
it was very a lot.
Frustrating. It's like,
but again, I think the thing that I was like hopeful about was that's the kind of thing that you could read about. Like when I did my history degree, we would read about it, but to have a fictionalized version of it written at the time where they didn't really know, like 1850, like you don't know really what the next 100 years is going to bring. Like they're still just like at the height of empire at this point, and they still actually have a little bit of ways to go before their start of a decline. Like there's that thing where they have no idea what's coming. They have no idea that in like another 70 years, their society will completely change. So for them, there's this, it's like a teenager, right? Where everything feels the most, it's the most feeling, but it's kind of irrelevant in some ways. I got that impression. And I think maybe the thing that the adaptation, because I rewatched it after, and I posted it in Discord, like how much I love that adaptation still after having read the book and slogging through it. But I just felt like maybe it was the way the actors portrayed it, or it was a little bit more modernized, just in little details that made it a little bit more palatable to a modern audience. And I think that's one of the things that adaptations can do. But it just was like, it was not what I wanted it to be. And it's maybe not fair of the book, but I think, you know, the other thing about classics for me is that having to read them because we picked it for book club is a very different feeling than like me picking away slowly at a classic over time because I want to read it. Like the Scarlet Letter took me months to read, and it's very short. And then, but forcing myself to read this, like I've realized that I really have to be in the mood for classics, and I have to be able to take it at a really slow pace. So this felt like torture to me. Like it was just, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Amy, you are right. And that's the thing. Like, I know that this is like a real thing, but I find that when I'm reading the actual fictional books, very difficult to sympathize with these people as they, stress out about the fact that they might have to, touch labor for the first time in their lives.
But I think it's such a big thing to have money come not from land, but from industry, right? Such a big thing. And there's so many fictionalized accounts, and like Downton Abbey is maybe a prime example of the changes in English society, like at the First World War. But this might be the first time I read about that kind of set in the mid 19th century as more like an internal thing. But yeah, I don't think it was successful. Like, again, I'm talking about kind of what I wanted it to be and like some of the stuff that I pulled from it. Like there was a great moment kind of at the beginning where the family moves away. I'm going to like from Helston, I think is where they're starting from. And they move north and they move into this house and they want to change the wallpaper. And it's like a no-go. But in the background, the landlord will change it for the main guy. I can't remember their names at all. And there was just this little moment where like clearly the people in this town recognize the new power dynamics of what's happening here. But this poor family who's like in la la land about what they think society is has no idea how things work, right? Like they have no power and they don't even know it yet. Like there's little moments of that I thought were interesting, but like I had to really look for them.
Yeah, Ron's very correct.
I love the Little Stranger.
The Little Stranger is probably my favorite book about the friction between classes in England. But that
Mhm.
one, I felt I just like that one better. That one was more twisty and interesting.
It's also like more modern,
Yeah, exactly.
right? It's
it's
not
set
written at the
after
time.
the World War II. I think it's set in like 1948. Um,
I do feel like ironing is a heaven forbid moment. I just don't iron. Yeah.
that's really funny. See, that's the type of thing that I find very difficult to read about when I read some of these books.
I think it takes a different kind of lens. Like
Yeah,
you have to work harder to understand where a character is coming from. It's not as easy to get on board and like buy into their emotions if you're like, oh, ironing is not that hard, people, come on.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a bigger ask. And like I was sad that this wasn't more successful.
So what are some classics that are like comparable to it that you preferred?
I don't even know that there is one. Like I said, I don't know that I've read a lot of books that deal specifically with this change in society. And even books written around World War One, I'm trying to remember, like there's certainly a lot of stuff that came out from the Lost Generation, like post World War One, that talks about social change in interesting kind of ways, but I'm struggling to find one that I would say is like a really great example. I think I read a lot of historical fiction written more recently that talks about it, but that's, to me, this feels almost like primary source material, even though it's fiction, than historical fiction written now, which I would find more palatable. The sentence structures are easier. The writing is easier to follow along with. And it's looking for those conversations specifically. Whereas I think in this one, I don't think she's not writing for a reader in 2020 who's looking back and wanting to talk about like classism in England and changing social norms. She's writing an interesting story about a young girl whose life is upheaved by her father's weird decision to leave the church, and it has to go and explore this thing that I think to many contemporary readers, certainly in London and in the South, would not know much about yet. Right? She's writing as kind of like a peek into a society that they don't even really recognize yet. So it's just a different, like her purpose here is very different than what I would want it to be, which is like totally unfair. It's just not, yeah. I don't know. Henry, lay down.
I mean, I don't have much to add besides the fact that
No.
the first 75 pages made me feel dumb. But I can totally see where you're coming from about the fact that you have to apply a certain type of expectation when you're reading a classic like this and contextualize it in its time frame.
Yeah.
I am neither smart enough to do that sometimes, nor did I have the patience or energy to do it with this book.
I think it's more that. Do you want to spend the time doing that? Because like, I know for me, whenever I read a classic, literally the first page, I always have to read the first paragraph like 4 times because I'm like, I feel dumb trying to get into how a classic is written because they're all sort of the same, but also sort of different. And you have to kind of get into the tone of the book and the pacing of the writing. And that takes me a while, but it does feel like an exercise in like study, like something I would do for university, as opposed to just like reading for fun, which is more what this is supposed to be about.
I would definitely say if I had like a course of study that like guided me through something like this, I would actually enjoy it more. But I never took an English class. I never took a literature class in college.
Me either.
I took a composition class in college, but I didn't take a literature course. So my literature studies ended in high school. So sometimes I feel like, especially when I'm watching BookTube, people who like majored in more liberal arts studies and stuff like that, and they talk sometimes about the way that they read books and stuff like that, I'm always jealous. Like I always feel like,
me too.
I wish I had the tool set to engage with literature that way. You know what I mean?
And the only way I did in university was specifically, we would never have read a full book like this, but we might have read like excerpts from fiction to illustrate a point in history. And so when I look at it, I'm very much coming at it from like a historical, like I want to understand the book's role in history, like both for the person writing it and what they were trying to say, but also just like using it as a way to better understand the society that it came from. And So like it is like more of a critical study kind of thing, but not from that literary bent, like you were saying, because I didn't take that either. I was very much looking at it like literally talking about the mill and how the mill ran and how textiles worked, and like understand. I have a very good grasp of that as like a backdrop. So that all felt very natural to me. But I was looking specifically at like the way it was addressed, how they talked about it. And I think like Amy's got a point.
Yeah, I was about to pull her up. This one?
Yeah. It did feel condescending and unnatural. And I think, that's an interesting thing to look at with a modern lens too, because I think we get a lot of people who feel like they have good intentions, white people typically, who feel like they have good intentions, doing things that are actually condescending and don't, fully understand what they're doing. And that felt very modern to me in some ways, and also completely historically accurate, that she would come up and think, I have this education, I have this like understanding of the world. And little does she know that, I think they understand the world a lot better than she does. Certainly the world that she's now living in. Yeah. The ending was, and that's one of the things that I don't think was super successful in the adaptation either. It all kind of just works out. I wanted them to get together anyway. Like that's fine with me. The way that it was handled though, she inherits all this money randomly as at the point that he's about to lose the mill, and like he's lost everything. And all of a sudden she comes back, and I think it's this like dual thing of she realizes how she feels about him, but also now magically can solve all of his problems. And there's this great scene, and this is the thing, the adaptation, there's this great scene. I don't know if anybody else has actually watched it, but there's this great scene. So her father, everybody dies, right? So her mom dies, and then her father dies unexpectedly. So now she's alone up in this town, and she's leaving. She's going to go back down to London to live with her family there. And there's this great moment in the adaptation where he's standing at the mill watching her like drive away. And you could see it in his eyes. There's like this desperation for her to look back and to like recognize that she has feelings for him, and she doesn't. She never turns around. And like, that's not really in the book, but it's what makes the show, like the adaptation, way more successful to me. And I don't know if that's just some corrective storytelling to realize that this book is a little loose on how well that works. And so they're trying to fix it. But like, it was so successful to me there in a way that the book just wasn't at all. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Oh my God. This is a thing in like every rom-com. Like it's such an overused storytelling mechanism, and it drives me insane.
Yeah, it does drive me nuts as well. I mean,
so her brother comes back to England to visit the dying mother, and on the platform there's an incident where he kind of pushes a man away, he falls down, and a couple days later he dies from like sort of unrelated things. So now there's an investigation happening. She's been seen with her brother, but dude, I cannot remember his name. Oh, Thornton, thinks that she's got like this male lover and she's behaving inappropriately for a woman of her single status that she's meeting at midnight on the train platform. But it's all because he's about to get arrested and she's trying to get her brother out of town. But now there's this so there's this whole misunderstanding that she's like secretly seeing this man, but she's not. It's her brother, but nobody knows she has a brother because he's like going to be arrested for mutiny or something. It's like it's bizarre, man. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I would have picked I don't know if we could have picked another classic that would have been more successful, to be honest, which sounds really bad. But like, I think a lot of the stuff that we're struggling with, like the writing style, kind of how crazy some of the plot was, like, I don't know if we can fix that really.
I think the one classic I want to read, and I guess it didn't come to my mind when we were thinking about classics because it's considered more of a classic of like genre fiction, is Frankenstein.
Yeah, and there's so much meat there. I reread it a couple years ago.
Oh, so you have read it? I've not.
A couple times. I definitely do. Like, I think you would get so much out of it.
I've read so few classics in my life. I cheated my way through high school.
Well, and it's got like, it's based in science, and again, it does that thing as a book that I think I like about this one, where it's investigating, it's very much an exploration of this emerging field of science and the possibilities of science and how it could be abused and then go horribly wrong as like a social discussion, a social commentary. Like it's it's brilliant, it's fascinating, and it's not very long.
I'll definitely read it.
Yeah. Do you want to move on?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, as I said, because I didn't read it, but I do have a lot of thoughts about The Third Rainbow Girl by Emma Copley Eisenberg. So this is a book about a double murder that took place in Appalachia. Do you say Appalachia or Appalachia? How do you say it?
Okay, well, I'm Canadian, and it's one of those things where we always grew up saying Appalachia, like the Appalachian Mountains, but I understand that that's now not correct.
I've heard it both ways, and I've heard it both ways from so many different people in my life that I'm not really sure if what I say is even like right, but I say Appalachia. It took place in the 1980s, in 1980. And there was a rainbow gathering taking place in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. And if you don't know what the Rainbow family is, they're a group of people who meet every year to have like a week-long gathering of just like celebrating being connected, working together. It's a hippie gathering is what it is. And yeah, you're right. So
I don't know if it's still right. It might be both. I'm right for wrong.
One of the in the county, the local people were a little bit skeptical about all these, hippies, coming to the county. And to give it some context, like a total of, I think, like 5,000 people lived in the county, and they were expecting anywhere between 5,000 and 15,000 hippies to descend upon this county. So it was going to be a lot of friction between the locals. And what ends up happening is that two young women who were trying to get to the gathering end up being killed and are discovered by a local man in a clearing. And the consensus amongst a lot of people is that the murderer had to have been local in order to carry out the killings where they did. And thus begins a 13-year long investigation with lots of real failures on the part of the police department, and kind of the stuff that you expect to see in these true crime things: false confessions, made up memories. And this book is also about Emma's time in this area, and she went there as part of AmeriCorps. Is that right? I think it was.
I don't even remember.
It was AmeriCorps. It was a teaching program, and there was a camp there to prepare young women and empower them to go on to the next part of their lives after high school. She started working there in 2009. She had an on-again, off-again relationship with the land, leaving, coming back. And eventually she hears the story of this crime and decides to kind of investigate it and link it back to her own experiences there. So I've got a lot of thoughts. This type of true crime is right up my alley. I don't like true crime where it's an incredibly sordid, salacious crime, and the whole point of the book seems to be stare at this awful thing that happened. Are you not gripped by this disgusting, awful thing that happened? Keep looking at it. Keep looking at it. I've just held your attention for 400 pages and gotten $17 out of you. Like that's not for me, and it really bothers me. So I like this, where it's a crime that you look at it from a larger context than just the act itself, but trying to contextualize it into place, the people, who gets accused, that type of thing is very interesting to me. I think this book was, and this is where you and I will have a little bit of disagreement, I thought this book was very successful in keeping me interested in the crime and the through lines that connected these people in the 1980s to this crime. All the different people, all the different testimonies, trying to figure out what the hell actually happened. And then I thought this book was wildly unsuccessful in trying to contextualize it back to the author and memoir itself. I thought the writing was incredibly uneven in places, bad even in a lot of places, overwrought. I thought that connections she was trying to make between, and it sounds awful because it was the crime against women, but even the connections she was trying to make between this crime and misogyny felt really tenuous, badly explained, especially when we find out what really happened to these women, which was much more about a racist serial killer than it was about, women being killed for being women, right? All of that felt very grasping. Okay, and I'm going to save my more hot takes for later, so I'll let you dive in what you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was funny reading this book this month because I did go on a bit of a true crime bender and watching stuff on Netflix at the same time, reading other true crime, and it really got me thinking about like what makes successful true crime, because I think for me, the true crime part of this wasn't very successful, and I think part of the problem I had was because of the way it was broken up by memoirs. So there is a point in this where the police are starting to investigate, right? And the trial maybe starts, and there's this parade of locals that gets brought in to give their testimony. But there were so many people, I had no idea who was who other than Jacob Beard, because he's like the main guy. I don't feel like she contributed much to the telling of the true crime element. Like, I think she took everything that happened and laid it out chronologically and put it together that way. But I'm much more interested in like an investigative journalist perspective where they're actively adding something to the conversation. Whereas this felt like, for the most of the book, she was just retelling what had happened in what order. And then at the end, it's almost like she threw in a section at the end where she does actually talk to some people herself, and tries to get somewhere. But even that, it was just more like, here are the people I talked to. This person wouldn't talk to me. This person didn't really have a lot to say. Here's the daughter of the serial killer. She's had a crap life. And like, it just didn't feel like there's no concrete evidence at the end of this that Jacob Beard did it or that Franklin did it. I believe that Franklin did it.
I think it's pretty clear that he did it.
But they don't have the concrete evidence to prove it. So nothing gets added in that element. And then there's a point kind of at the end of the book too, where she then explicitly addresses why this book is the way that it is, why explicitly she felt she needed to tell the story of these murders and wrap it up in a memoir. And I got the impression that she strongly felt a connection to the case in some way. She strongly felt that her experiences there needed to be told side by side with this true crime element. And I don't doubt that she believes it. I think she feels something there, but I don't think she's successful at communicating what that is to the reader. And I don't think that connection she's inserting herself into a story that I don't think she needs to insert herself in. So for me, I want, like we talked about the Sarah Perry After the Eclipse, right? That's a mixture of memoir and true crime. It's her mother that gets murdered though, and she's in the house when it happens. So the connection there is obvious, it's immediate. The emotion is like through the roof, right? In this book, I just don't get why she felt like, I don't get any emotional connection. I didn't get an emotional connection to her as the author. Most of the time I was just mad at her. And I also actually didn't really feel an emotional connection to the two women who were murdered. And I don't know if it's just the way it was told.
I was pretty hopeful that the book was really going to humanize these women that were killed, because it starts off pretty early on with a picture of them.
Yeah. And we do get a bit of backstory.
We do get a little bit of backstory and biography about them, which I found very interesting. This book, something else that really bothered me is that this book purports itself to be the long life of a double murder in Appalachia.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to look at the ripple effects that this had on the community. It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Like, let me, like, not at all. You see the ripple effects it had on the people who were directly involved. And the only time that she even hears about the case is because the person who discovered the bodies, who was a local doctor named Tim, when he discovered the bodies, he was not a doctor, but at the present day of the story, when she's living in Appalachia, he is. He reads a poem at their writing group about discovering the bodies, and it's very emotional. That's how she hears about it.
Yeah.
So she didn't hear about some like organic ripple effect through other people in the community. The only people who are affected by this crime that you learn about are the people who were directly connected to it, accused, talked to the police, etc. So you do not see in any way, shape, or form how this crime rippled through the community.
I
At
almost
all.
get the
Period.
opposite
Full stop.
opinion.
It really pissed me off that was the way this book was sold.
I think it's almost like, so there's a thing made of how the murderer must be local because there's no way an outsider could do this for whatever reason. Which to me felt
because of the geography. Well, okay, so
yes and no. The interstate's right there. Like, I think serial killers are capable, or killers in general are capable of doing a lot of stuff that you would think is like difficult or extreme, aside from actually killing another person. The idea that somebody could find a desolate spot and then find their way back to the interstate doesn't seem impossible to me. But if the idea is that everybody feels like this crime had to be committed by a local, I would expect the ripple effects of that community to be like, nobody ever felt safe again.
Yes.
Everybody was turning on each other. Not really. I almost got the impression that the community moved on very quickly from this. Very quickly. Like, nobody cares anymore.
So, yeah.
And again, I don't know if that's just the way it's told, because I don't want to.
What it is because
like,
she's
take away from it.
It's because she's a navel-gazing person.
Yeah.
Like that's why. So she didn't have any interest in finding out about the community. She only had an interest in trying to find the ways that this connected back to her and making some terribly bad memoir links to it. I think she sees
herself as the third rainbow girl. Like, am I reading?
And that's what really pissed me off too. That really pissed me off. So, like, this is such a difficult book because on the one hand, I read this incredibly quickly.
It's very fast.
And I've been in a reading slump. So any book that really makes me turn the page like this, I have a little bit of an affinity towards right now because it's, keeping my interest. But yeah, there was an element to this and her attitude towards this situation that really got under my skin. Yeah. And like, there's books where you think to yourself, I would not ever want to meet this author. Like, I don't want to have a cup of coffee with her. And that's how I felt about this book.
Yeah.
I thought the writing in places was very bad. Like, very, very, very bad.
There's the line where she says, I think I might be a writer, to Jesse.
Yes. That was.
And like, clearly, like, it felt like she woke up one day and was like, I think I'm a writer. I'm going to write a book.
Here's where it committed, from me, the ultimate narrative nonfiction sin. And I know that this is a thing that happens in a lot of narrative nonfiction, but it really bothers me every single time is you get to a certain point in the end and where the memoir is meeting up with what's happening. And she's like, and then I realized I had to write a book. It had to be the book you're reading. And I just I hate that so much. Like, and it happens across so many different narrative nonfiction. So I know it's not just her, but it really, 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 really gets under my skin. I do not like that as a storytelling
But I'm glad she addressed it. I'm glad she said something so explicit, because the whole time I was reading this book, I was like, why the fuck did she write this book? And so for her to even get that couple paragraphs insight as to why she felt this had to be written this way is better than us just like making stuff up. And I'm still making some like stuff up about guessing about how and why this played out the way it did. But like, I agree. So,
so there was a point. So it's a part of the writing that I found very, very bad. So this is
throwing the cats across the room. Sorry. I also had a moment where I was like, are you kidding me? If you're going to throw a cat across the room, maybe don't write about it in your book.
So this is the point in the book when, so one thing that she does in the writing style that really got under my skin was lists. So it'd be like a paragraph where it would just be like sensory experience, sensory experience, sensory experience, sensory experience, sensory experience, paragraph end, time to go to the next one. And I just really didn't like that at all. But then there was this one where this is when she first met Trey, and she goes, he was handsome and solid with a shock of red hair that stuck up in the front. Didn't look at me, but looked at me. It's like the type of like MFA crap that someone agonized over for 20 minutes. Yeah. And I just really hated it.
And it was like, I'm brilliant. We're leaving it.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Then in its construction, not just on the sentence by sentence level, which has several examples of it being very, very poor. There was one point, and I was talking to you about this earlier, where she was talking about the prosecutor Wafer, I think it's the Wafel, can't remember his name.
Yeah, and, there's so many people.
She described him as having cement in his blood. and then being able to recognize people on the street who also had cement in their blood. What the fuck does that mean? Okay, like what are you talking about? And I reread that paragraph multiple times trying to see if I could like get it, but like it was so obvious that she had this like sensory image in her mind of cement and blood, and was like, all right, I've got to put it in there somewhere. I love this image, and that's how a lot of the writing felt. Like it didn't feel organic to the story. It felt like something that she thought was clever and just had to shove in the book.
Yeah.
Then towards the end of the book, as we're kind of like getting where she's like going to be like, time to
sorry, Chris came with receipts and the power bank. Oh my god, yes.
I kind of got the power bank thing. Well, probably sounds funny because in the UK, don't you call that hairstyle fringe?
Which is not what we call it here. But then you found a picture of, there was the one woman who we thought maybe had power bangs.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. It's in the Discord somewhere.
This is where the book really like went off for me, and I was like, "What the fuck did I just read?" So towards the very end of the book, she is talking about the town and trying to contextualize everything. And there's a big long thing where she's talking about the family of these women that had been killed, and then it gets to like a little paragraph break with a space, and then it goes on to a new section, and the new section starts off like this: the Mountain View student with the scar is a trans man named Jordan. Now, previously, unless I'm forgetting something, she had not mentioned a Mountain View student with a scar. So you read that sentence, you're like, wait, did I miss something? Like, I'm flipping back, like trying to figure out like where did she mention this? Nope, I couldn't find that I had missed something. And then she goes on like 5 pages talking about this guy named Jordan and his life in Pocahontas and his escaping a flood. It has nothing to do with anything. Nothing at all. Like, she just wanted to, like, it was like the worst type.
But she wanted to get that stat in about how West Virginia has the most trans teens in America per capita.
Well, what does that got to do with anything? Like, it's an important stat, but it's got absolutely nothing.
No, but that's the thing is, I think for her, it's an important stat. And so she's like, can I get this into the book? Yes, I can.
So amateur. And it was so, and like to see this book, I mean, this book was like New York Times notable, 100 best, I think, from BuzzFeed. Like, it was all over the place a couple years ago. Yeah. And I just think I think that the story, like the true crime element itself kept me captivated. The actual book itself is shit. Like, it's really bad. Which is disappointing, I read it right? Really, really quickly. Yeah, I found this very frustrating in the end. And it felt very exploitive. Very exploitive.
Yeah. Which is the thing that we were trying to avoid. Like, going back to what you started with, when we were going to go into true crime, we were very clear about the kind of true crime we did not want to read, right?
And this
sort of got there in a weird way.
Well, it didn't do the thing where it was like, look at these bodies, look at the
horror, not gratuitous
like that, which is I think is probably worse. But what it did do is where it was like, look at these poor Appalachians. And,
yeah, so I spent a lot of time drinking with, and then had some relations with, but then was an outsider the whole time.
Let's talk about the relationship with Jessie, shall we? Boy, I mean, she just really wants to be a victim. Like, that's how I felt when I was reading that, where I was like, she just really wants to find a story here where she was somehow... Like, okay, I get it. Like, some people made some sexist comments to her, right? And I'm not trying to minimize that. Like, that would be very frustrating. Don't get me wrong. And I'm glad she stood up for herself in the instances when she did, and all of that. It was very tame, I felt. Like, and maybe I grew up in backwoods Indiana, and so, like, none of this shocked me, but I was just like... Yes, but this is nothing particularly spectacular for Appalachia. You know, like I didn't read this and thought, oh my God, those hillbillies saying that shit to her. You know what I mean? Like, did you?
No, I felt like it could have been worse. And like, race doesn't really come into this book in the same way that it could have. Mm-hmm. But I think like, so at the beginning of the book, I remember, so I went back and found, so there's in the first memoir section. So I posted in the Discord in the first like breakdown, I'm already so hooked on this book, blah, blah, blah. And then literally the next thing I write like half an hour later is, okay, hold the phone. Because she has a line in there. She says, I felt that no one knew I had that start again. I felt that no one I knew had a clue about America, its texture and shape and flavor. Right, where she's done some social studies about the area, and then goes and lives that, and is like, look at these people. Like,
there's like a 5-page chapter where she's deciding whether or not to go to Appalachia, and she goes through like all this like stuff about America, all this different stuff, and like a reckoning with her privilege. And it just felt like the worst type of Tumblr wokeism shoved into a book.
Yeah.
It had no real substance to anything and added very little except to perform for the reader that the author is aware of her privilege of being able to travel into this community and do some local work for a couple of years.
But with that like kind of savior complex, although she also like somehow gets drawn in to the community and the land and whatever, but it just kind of felt like maybe she was bored.
Oh my gosh. She just sounds like an atrocious person. I hope she never sees this.
But again, I think it's that kind of white savior complex.
Very self-centered.
Yeah, where she's going to go into this place that, you know, and at the beginning of the book, and I think there were a couple of us that really appreciated, I think I have very much preconceived notions about West Virginia as a state that is based on like the current electoral map and recent news, let's say, as a generalization. So for her to go in and do a little bit more of a history of the area and what it was like for the past, 75 years or so, like all of that was actually really helpful and useful. And I thought that that was going to set up what we were talking about before, which was like understanding how this crime had a long-term impact on this community. Like that by understanding the historical and geographic setting that we're talking about, that information was going to be critical to understanding the crime and also how that crime affected this community for however many years now. And all of that was really interesting, but I don't think it was necessary to the story. I wish it had been necessary to the story, but I don't think she's successful. Like I was like, oh yeah, we're getting all this history. Like I understand this place so much better. These people are maybe not who I thought they were. But then she doesn't capitalize on that effort she's put in. She just goes and like lives with the people and then has some crisis about it. It's just weird.
It's bizarre. It's just really bizarre.
Yes,
I really felt this as well. It really frustrated me. I felt like it did not get into the issues that really affected these young women in West Virginia.
There's like one moment where she gets like super drunk and ends up like in the car with Jesse or something within like sight, I guess. And she feels like kind of a failure as a student, like she's not setting a good example. And that's really the only time that she talks about the reconciliation between what she's doing there, like in her personal life, and what her professional expectations are. But she doesn't go there. Like I just didn't feel like I understood why she went there to teach. Like she doesn't seem to have this massive like calling to do this work. She's going there like as a social experiment so that she can write a book about it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if she knew she was going to write a book about it afterwards. I don't think she knew she wanted to be a writer until she really got there. She woke up
one morning. Yeah.
But and as somebody who has a lot of friends who went on to go into AmeriCorps, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who do great work for AmeriCorps, don't get me wrong, but for a lot of people in AmeriCorps, it's because you get done with college or you get a summer and you don't know what to do and you've been a really good student and you have some volunteer work behind you and AmeriCorps will accept you, right? I mean, so I just feel like she was probably just directionless, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is nothing wrong with that. And if you can funnel that into doing something positive, that's a great thing that AmeriCorps does. Like, no shade, don't get me wrong, but I agree. I don't think it was because she had a particular calling to do this.
No, but that would have been an interesting story too. Like listless woman who like knows that she's privileged, but doesn't know what she wants to do, decides to join this group and go to this place. And here's all the stuff here's the people she met. Here's the things she learned. And it's take the true crime out. Like that's a memoir.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It could be a memoir in and of itself.
Well, I don't know if it could be because she wasn't a very particularly interesting person.
But if she had come to some sort of like realization, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. If she
that is the beginning of a book that could have been something.
If
And
she
I think the
had,
true crime, like she didn't add anything to that true crime conversation.
no, I mean she didn't. You're right, and I could have found the story of these young women on my own, and it would have been just as equally of a fascinating story. But I didn't, and I did find that aspect of the book fascinating. I was completely riveted by the police procedural, and I was very riveted by the fact that they were able to get so many different people to have so many different memories of the event, none of which were true. I mean, obviously false, concocted, under pressure. And then they were able to take all of those fragments of memories and like Frankenstein it into a story that they could tell a jury. Like that was the part to me that was like completely fascinating. Because, what's amazing to me is, I'm reading this and I'm reading these, fragmented, horrible memories. They don't add up to anything. There's no, they're so contradictory. One person says this, they change their story over so many years. And what's amazing to me is then when you're presented with the very blatant, obvious facts that this serial killer who is confessing to the murders and is able to give very pertinent information that matches up with the facts of the case, the fact that the police officer, Akron or whatever his name was,
Alkier, whatever.
I hope that this dude reads this and realizes how much of a worthless piece of shit he is. Okay, like he should feel ashamed of him. I don't know that it was that
clear cut for me.
He should feel ashamed of himself till the day he dies for being that stupid. Like the fact that he would be like this, all these fragmented memories. The fact that those facts don't line up really well doesn't mean anything. But the serial killer, like he didn't say the right county, and maybe his geography wasn't great. He drew you a map. He told you the type of gun that he used that matches up with the ballistic records. Yeah. He told you that he was at a convenience store where a store clerk saw him and two women.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was the evidence that the woman had bought some bean paste that she had consumed at the convenience store, which matches up with what the clerk told. I mean, all of this presents itself into an incredibly cohesive, clear thing. And this dude is just like, can't like, like those, like he gets so hung up on, like on the couple of little details from the serial killer, and then there's nothing. I was
like that's
floored.
What made Making a Murder so successful too, right? Like the Stephen Avery case is similar in a lot of ways, where you're in a small town, people have certain preconceived notions about a person, and when a crime gets committed, there's an obvious suspect, and local law enforcement seems very easy to piece things together in a way that makes sense to them. And like clearly the fallout of that case, especially his first case, the rape case that he went to prison for 18 years but didn't actually do, and then gets arrested again for murder then. Like it's very similar in that way. And I wonder how much, like I think so much that I find interesting about true crime is like trying to paint a picture of local cops gone wrong, right? Bungling investigations, ignoring pertinent details, unwilling to accept anything other than what they think is the truth. And I have to wonder how prevalent it actually is, because those are the cases we certainly hear about. Well, but they're the ones that get the media attention. I don't think we ever hear about cases where good police work was done, detectives made the right call, like they listened to the evidence, because that has to happen. We can't say that like 90% of the people who are in prison for murder didn't do it, because that's just not true.
I mean, I agree, but I think that most of the time, the like police investigations into murders and stuff like this are extremely clear cut. You know what I mean? It's actually very few cases that require years of investigation.
It's also in this case, like, and again, so I read most of this book right at the beginning of the month and then realized last night that I hadn't finished it. So I have a big gap in between remembering some of the details. So I think the thing is like the reasonable doubt here should have been enough, right? Like Jacob Beard, there's enough reasonable doubt to what happened that there never should have been, like the serial killer bits of it should have come to light and been a little bit more openly discussed.
I think it was obvious he was a weird dude. Like, I mean,
for sure. Every small town has a weird dude.
But like, who calls up the mother or father of someone who's been murdered and like leaves some cryptic message? Like, that's bizarre, right? I mean, that is incredibly bizarre. And I mean, like, suspicion should have fallen on him for that. Don't get me wrong. I was really fascinated by that, and the fact that they were able to get away with it at a jury. Then the other thing that fascinated me about this was learning about the serial killer, Joseph Franklin, who I didn't know about. I mean, I knew that Larry, like I told you previously, I knew that Larry Flint, is that his name? The guy that owned Hustler.
Yeah.
I think his name's Larry Flint. I knew he had been shot, because like I remember as a kid watching TV programs where he was in like wheelchairs and stuff like that. I knew he had been shot. I had no idea that he had been shot by this racist serial killer who probably has how many murders attested to him? Nearly 20 to 30 or something.
Dispute. Yeah, up to 30.
Up to 30. Never heard of this guy. Should be one of the most famous serial killers in America. And I was just totally shocked, like that was a thing. And I thought that this guy's his account of what happened, the serial killer's account of what happened, just makes infinitely more sense than any other account that was presented in the book. Like, just way more sense. Especially his casual attitude about wasting them. When he said that some people have to be wasted. Like, that as a motivator made way more sense than any of the others. I mean, the fact that there was no sexual assault that had been done on these women, despite the fact that these men were supposedly gathering around them for sexual gratification, which, all this different stuff. So, like, his account of it made so much more sense. And the fact that they were not willing to listen to this man was just totally shocking to me.
Well, and they clearly have, like, not a lot of experience with crime like this, because if you look at, I have a hard time believing that somebody with no previous criminal experience could murder 2 women with not enough evidence ever to convict and get away with it all this time. Like, from everything I know about every case I've ever heard of, people who are inexperienced in committing criminal acts, especially murder, if this is the first one, this is too clean for a first killing. And I don't think somebody who lived in town like that would get away with it. Like, there's a couple moments in here where people are getting drunk and they're saying, I killed so-and-so. But like Zan was saying up earlier, like, I gave up on keeping track because literally the stories change so often. And when people are drunk or high, I just have and they're at a party and they're with their pal, like, I don't give a ton of credence to that a lot of the time. It felt to me like, if the balance here is between a local who knew the area and could get to this spot and they're the only ones that could do it, versus a local who has never committed a murder before being able to commit 2 murders and get away with it all this time, I just can't. I believe much more strongly that somebody who is an outsider could have come into the community, killed, and left town than I do a local person could have committed a crime like this to such a successful level that they were never caught. You see people in their first kills. Like, how many times have we seen that? If you go back and look at any major serial killer case and you go back to their first victims, like, I think even some of them, they don't even know who the first victims were because it's so, the MO is so unlike what they become known for because they don't know what they're doing, right? The murders are sloppy. They probably took them longer to kill because they didn't know what they were doing. Like, we see that, I think Richard Ramirez was like that. Like, it's very common. And then also, if you do have a killer in town who randomly kills 2 women, we know the statistics are very clear on most people are murdered by somebody they know. The people that aren't, that's when we get serial killers, and that's when we have no idea. Like, that's when detectives have a really hard time with a case because there's no connections. If the kills are at random, it becomes infinitely harder to track them. So if you have a local who's decided to randomly kill 2 women who happen to come into town for this gathering, and then they never kill again, they successfully execute 2 women, never get caught, never kill again. Like, why? There's no motive there at all, in my mind. It makes way more sense that Franklin did it. Or somebody completely off, and I don't even know.
Yeah, somebody else. Yeah. But I mean, Franklin's account of the thing just makes a lot of sense.
He was very clear.
I think the thing they kept saying too is, oh, he could have read about it somewhere. But then the cop, I don't know, I always thought about the same thing. I was like, what do you mean read about it somewhere? Like, who was publicizing all these details about this case? Like, it
There's
was
no
sounded like
internet yet, guys.
yeah,
Like,
well,
it's
yeah,
not that easy.
there's no internet yet, and yes, it did sound like there was maybe a little bit of media coverage about it, but it certainly wasn't national news even at the time it happened.
Yeah.
It was national news when they got acquitted and all that different stuff, but
There's also no, I was surprised. See, and this is the thing, I think true crime for me, mixed with memoir, is a very different beast than true crime on its own. Because I think for me, keeping the details of this case clear, and again, having that investigative journalism aspect where she's actively trying to get to some new truth somehow is missing from this book.
oh yeah,
But
completely.
there was no discussion of things like holdback information. So I don't understand if Franklin, like it seemed from the way the book was written and me having done no other like research outside of this book on the case, it seemed to me that Franklin was giving details that maybe were not holdback details, but I would find it hard to believe that a paper would report on all of those details.
Well, like the ballistic reports, I'm sure were not published. The fact that
This is what I'm saying.
The entrance wounds were delivered the way that we would have expected.
Right. And again, I don't know if that was all public record or if any of it was kept as holdback. And I don't know if I don't know, right? These police, this is not what they do typically. Yeah. This is not the kind of stuff were they smart enough to keep something back? Like none of that was discussed. And those are things that I think are so common in the last 20, 30 years of police investigations, is to keep something back and also to have that discussed as part of the true crime narrative. Because a lot of what it comes down to is who could have known what and when, right? Because some of these long unsolved cases, the police will release something like a decade later, 2 decades later, that was held back, but now they're releasing because they have a reason to and whatever. And like, it just didn't feel like true crime in the way that I expect true crime to be written. It just felt like a recounting of the facts instead of really trying to investigate it.
Oh yeah, I completely agree about that. But I was still riveted by the case because I had never heard of this case, and I did find the aspect of how these people concocted all these different memories and how the police then came through and strung those memories together into a story that they were willing to present to the jury. I found all of that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, there are definitely fascinating elements to me, and I think for me it just got lost in the way it was told.
Yes. And it got lost being couched in all the memoir stuff.
The memoir stuff.
Interrupted it, ruined the tension, and was frankly very, very bad.
Well, and confusing, because by the time I finished a memoir, I was saying to Chris, like, I ended on a true crime section. So when I came back to the book this morning, I came in on a memoir section and I had like another true crime to go or whatever. I read the memoir section. That was fine. I kind of remembered what was happening. But by the time I got to the true crime section, I was like, oh shit, like where were we in this case? Because it's so disjointed. Like you said, it loses the tension as like a storytelling element. But I think I also, like, again, lost track and couldn't keep up with the details because I don't think it was super clearly laid out. Like, I'm all for a true crime book. And I listen to a ton of like true crime podcasts and stuff where it's unsolved and they're not trying to make a case for or against something. They're just trying to present all sides of a case and leaving it unopened to say, these are the things we don't know that we would need to know to solve this crime, period. But in this case, I don't even feel like I don't even know what she's trying to do. She's literally just recounting facts and maybe pointing to Franklin at the end as like, okay, but really, are we going to ignore all of this? And she talks to Jacob Beard, I guess, at the end. But like, I don't know. I just didn't get the point of why, like, I think she felt a personal connection as an outsider. She felt a connection to these victims and to this third rainbow girl. But that's as far as it went. Like, she doesn't have a stake in this at all.
No, not at all. And like I said, for me, what this book felt like she did was she, realized she wanted to be a writer. She heard about this case from her writing group. And then she's like, that's an interesting story. I bet I could find a way to tell that. And here's going to be my attempt at stringing together my connections. Like, it felt very grasping. Like, here's the way I might be connected, but I never felt that she had any connection to any of it. I didn't feel like her experiences were particularly meaningful in trying to get to the heart of Appalachia as a place. I didn't think any of it was very worthwhile.
But it's funny because even the case itself, like, the case itself involves 2 women who are outsiders coming into this community and being murdered. the case doesn't actually, by an outsider, probably, like,
most likely,
most likely. I don't feel like the case itself is really representative of the community either.
No.
Like, I'm like, let's make up a murder. Sounds awful. But if there was a small town where everybody knew each other and some local kid gets murdered by somebody in town, right? There's no chance of it being an outside killer. I don't know how we would construct this, but it would say more about, and you know, maybe there's like these socioeconomic things at play as to why this happened. Like, give me a case that's actually representative of the community and what's going on in the community, the struggles, the opportunities, whatever about the community. This case does not feel representative of this community at all. And it's just that it happened to take place there.
Yeah. And the reactions to it also didn't feel particularly interesting or indicative of a place.
No.
Like I said, for me, there was an element to this book that was successful because I was very gripped by the story of these murders and
I was at the beginning. I will give you that. I was in at the beginning.
And that held my interest throughout. I thought that the way it was structured and trying to couch it in this memoir thing was just a mess.
Which is really disappointing because I was so excited for this.
She's writing a novel right now and some short stories, and maybe her fiction would be better because she's not. You're not viewing it as the lens of like, oh my god, this woman is just trying to make herself blah 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 blah. Like, it would just be truly fiction. Not a great book for me. Although I read it very quickly, and it's got me in the mood for reading again. So
that was one of the biggest successes of this book, is that I wanted to read more true crime and watch more true crime. Like, Netflix has so much available.
But it actually made me want to read more memoir.
Yeah, interesting.
Because it made me kind of like want, because like it was trying to do the memoir thing and it didn't really do it very well. So now I want to read like a good memoir. So I've got Somebody's Daughter by Ashley Ford that I'm going to try and start reading. Oh my gosh. Today.
She was a speaker at the Ontario Library Association Super Conference, like a virtual speaker. And she was talking about this memoir upcoming and just talking about how important, like, this happens at all library conferences ever. We get somebody from the outside world talking about how important libraries are to them, which is like fine, because that's what they think the theme of everything is. Like Sarah Jessica Parker talking about taking her kids to the New York Library, like that's happened. Barack Obama just spoke at ALA, whatever. She was talking about the very real, I think, impact that libraries had for her. And she was talking about this memoir, and I'm like so excited to read it.
Well, I'm really excited. So I thought for some reason I had it in my mind that she was much older than me, but she's actually only about 5 years older than me.
Right.
And she grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is about an hour and a half away from where I grew up. So it'll be really cool. I like, there's not a lot of like fiction or memoir or any type of literature coming out about Indiana. Yeah. So I'm pretty excited to read that.
She was so impressive in that talk. Like we were all like so excited for the book and just blown away by her. And she was a highlight for me of that conference.
Yeah. So it kind of, this book got me in the mood for memoir. So I'm excited about that one.
I don't know. I binged so much True Crime Garage. Like, if you guys are looking for a podcast recommendation, I wouldn't say they're perfect. There's certainly things they say or believe that I don't super agree with, but part of me is like a little bit like, that's probably a good thing in my life. Like, we all live typically in an echo chamber of people who believe and say the things that we would believe in and say. So to have people that have a slightly different opinion is not bad. And they have 510 episodes or something.
Wow.
From like every case you've ever heard of to a whole bunch of cases you haven't heard of. And they do try to focus sometimes on more recent cases that still like cases that they think have a really high probability of being solvable if the right person hears the right information and comes forward. So yeah, like I've just been whole hog on True Crime Garage, and I'm still on season 2 of Making a Murderer, because that's an interesting like social experiment in its own right. Like the spectacle of it all.
I really struggled with it.
The first series had some real issues. Well,
I think I've said this before. Making a Murderer and Serial had very opposite than intended impact on me. Where I got to the end of both of those things, I was like, these guys did it. And they've got a whole like true crime thing around them, trying to convince people they didn't.
I think for me, like talking about procedurals, the thing I loved about Making a Murderer was how much of the procedure was included in that series. Like
Mm-hmm.
literally what happened in the courtroom, and how the investigation went. Now in series 2, we've got a different, like we got that woman coming in who's like, I forget her name. She's like the person who gets people off who she thinks haven't done things. But his original trial lawyer, one of them said like, you know, years after the fact, like, I hope he's guilty actually, because if he's not, I can't handle it. And like, I think that's how I feel too. Like, I hope he's guilty, because if he was sat in jail for 18 years for a rape he never committed, and then gets arrested again for a murder that he didn't commit and gets put away for the rest of his life, like, I can't take that anymore. Like, I agree with that. I think, God, I hope he did it.
Yes, Amy, represent. I felt that way much more strongly about Serial than I did Making a Murderer. Serial, I got to the end of Serial, and I was like, Adnan killed his girlfriend. I was like, he totally did it.
The thing that is weird to me about like Western justice systems is that it's adversarial by nature and has very little to do with the truth. It's who can argue the best thing in court. And I think things like Serial, I remember very clearly listening to Serial. It's so good. Like, I would just sit and literally stare at a wall listening to the next episode.
I had literally just gotten my first job at like a real lab. And I would like sit there, be like doing lab work, listening to it, which was probably a very bad idea. And I would like have the pipette in my hand, and I would just stop. And I would like stand there with the pipette and be, oh yeah, I gotta like, you know.
But that's what, so Serial is very good at creating reasonable doubt, right? Which is sort of all it takes. And I think there was reasonable doubt in that case. I don't know that I feel strongly whether or not he did it, but West Cork was great. And there's also, they just made a Netflix series on that case. I forget what it's called.
I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's about a French woman who goes to Ireland and gets murdered.
I really wanted to. I started listening to a podcast. I listened to the whole thing actually, and it was a really good podcast up until the very end, which was called "The Root of Evil." Have you listened to it?
No.
It's about the Black Dahlia murder.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, that was a really good podcast up until the very end. So it's told from the people who were like the granddaughters of the guy who did it. And they are like presenting the evidence that their grandfather was the Black Dahlia murder. And it was really, really good up until like, I would say my big complaints about the podcast were at the very end, it turned into like this big like family reunion. Let's like hash out all our personal beef, which I didn't quite understand why they were doing that. And 2 was they never explained how their dad knew the Black Dahlia. Like, they definitely laid out the evidence that he did it. Like, right. But I was like, how did he know this woman? Like, he knew this woman. There's a picture of him with this woman. Yeah. But like, they never even attempted to try and explain how they, like, were they lovers? Like, what was going on there? But it's, other than that, it's a really interesting podcast.
I'll have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yes, I was looking it up on my phone, Amy. Sophia, Murder in West Cork. The podcast was really good. Like, okay. I listened to it a couple years ago, and then I was randomly like taking a break from Making a Murderer, and it came up as a recommended show, and I was like, oh yes, I do want to watch it. Oh, and also, if you're in the Sons of Sam new series on Netflix was amazing.
I can't watch that. I was horrified by Son of Sam as a child. Like,
their argument is that David Berkowitz, and he said before, I thought it was really well done. He says he didn't commit all the murders. He thinks he should be punished anyway. Like, he's not trying to get away from any of the punishment or the blame here, but they lay out a very solid case for him being part of a larger conspiracy, and that he wasn't the only killer. And I was like all in. It's such a well-produced thing, and it's not gratuitous. And it's just got like, it's got so much great footage of New York at the time. It was so good. I'm too busy reading. This is why Ron, I don't get more reading done.
Here's the secret. You have to really not care about your job.
I listen to podcasts while I work. Yeah.
And then listen to podcasts while you're working.
Yeah. Not with all tasks, but like if I can listen to something like a podcast while I'm working,
unless something demands like 70% of my brain power at work, my headphones are in.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to as well.
And nothing at my job requires 70% of my brain power. Okay, we should talk about the
sorry. No, I'm all you guys on Discord. We can keep posting.
Oh yeah.
Some true crime recommendations. There's a couple other series that I watched on Netflix that were really good. Not all murdery ones. This is an art heist. That was really good too. Anyway, next month
we are reading The End of Days by Jenny Urpenbeck for Women in Translation.
Yeah, I'm excited. My copy came in.
Everyone on Twitter has been talking about Women in Translation, and I was like, oh, I haven't gotten my I don't have any Women in Translation on my TBR. And then I remember we were doing this. I was like, oh yeah.
We're doing
translation on my TBR. So this is by Jenny Urpenbeck, who is a German writer, and I have completely forgotten what the book is about. Do you remember what it's about?
It's the Life After Life Kate Atkinson dude.
Oh, that's right. So
which is probably a really unfair thing to say.
You know what? I've been wanting to read Life After Life for years, so I might do like a side by side, read Life After Life and read this month, and then kind of compare.
Confused. Yeah.
Like how I feel about them. Well, I won't read them like at the same time. Like,
no, I did that with 1984 and Brave New World, and I still have a hard time remembering the difference. Sorry, I'm Googling it.
Oh, it is actually August 1st. You're correct.
It is August 1st, yeah.
Wow, time does that little sneaky thing on you.
I read the summary, like the blurb again, like when I bought the book, because I realized my library didn't own it like 3 days ago, and I was like, oh crap. It sounds really good.
Yeah.
Because the first review is End of Days is everything Life After Life should have been. Oh my gosh.
Shade.
So it's apparently, it consists essentially of 5 books, each leading to a different death of the same unnamed female protagonist. How could it have gone differently? The narrator asks in the intermezzos. First chapter begins with the death of a baby in the early 20th century Habsburg Empire. Same girl grows up in Vienna after World War I. She survives adolescence and moves to Russia with her husband. Like, it kind of moves through the 20th century.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, with the same woman, but who dies in like different ways and in different times. I'm really excited about it. It's also not long. I will post the chapter breakdowns in... Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be uplifting, Heidi, I have to say. It seems a little bit like depressing literary fiction in some ways, historical fiction. So, yeah, I'll post the breakdowns today.
I need some depressing literary fiction. I've been reading nothing but fantasy all year, which, don't get me wrong, I love fantasy. But, I do want to kind of vary my reading a little bit.
A little bit.
Yep.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's going to be August. I'm very, very excited.
Me too. And, it's going to be kind of a nice... Like, after North and South taking so long, Third Rainbow Girl was quick. I think this one will be quick. The Sympathizer, I have a feeling, is going to take a little bit longer. It is a longer book and a bit more dense.
And then we have The Lions of Alrazon.
Yeah, which is long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it sounds like it's going to be a fairly quick read as far as plotting and stuff.
So. I'm like, every time I think about it, I'm nervous.
Well, there's lots of people who love GGK, so
I think for me the thing about book club though is like it's the same thing about having a YouTube channel is when you read things knowing you're going to have to discuss it in a more like critical way than just having a feeling about it and then moving on. I'm going to be looking, I think, a little bit more critically at it and knowing that other people will be doing the same and like posting their thoughts, like not to discourage you guys from posting your honest thoughts at all. I just mean that like sometimes somebody will say something about a book that you've loved and you're like, oh, I never even thought of that. And it changes. And so I'm kind of aware that this is going to change how I feel about the book.
It probably won't too much though, because I mean, you like GGK a lot. You've read all of his books. Yeah. He's not like some underdog in a lot of ways. Like he's very critically acclaimed.
Yeah. So. I'm hopeful, but that'll be good. And then maybe we can pick something a little bit shorter again for November, December. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for chatting with me through all these. And thank you for putting up with the fact that I didn't read North and South, but my brain couldn't handle it. But anyway, thank you guys for coming. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day and a good start to their week and a good reading month in August. All right. See you guys.
Ditto. Bye.